Please welcome back to the stage Matthew Swift and the United States Secretary of Transportation, the Honorable Elaine Chao.
Well, Secretary,
Matt.
welcome back to Concordia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
It's a great conference. There are always such interesting people and interesting participants and attendees. So glad to be here.
Thank you. It's great. It's an honor to have you back. Thank you. I want to do something for the broader audience of Concordia because I think this is important. And in the course of this conversation, I want people to really understand what the Department of Transportation does.
Right.
I think that's very important. But first, it's a little more than a year, of course. What are you most proud of thus far at the Department of Transportation that's been accomplished?
You know, the department is a wonderful department. I was deputy secretary and then former deputy maritime administrator. So this is my third stint back at the department, and I haven't been back since about 25 years. So it's a real honor and a privilege for me to be back at the department. It has 55,000 wonderful professionals. And the things that I'm most proud of are, number one, we want to keep the flying public and everyone who uses the transportation system safe. Mm-hmm. And we want to ensure that the transportation system is part of the economic vitality of our country because the efficiency of the transportation system contributes to increased productivity, better quality of life. And then the third emphasis that we have is ensuring that when we engage with the emerging technologies that are coming online, on stream, that we do so in a way that addresses legitimate public concerns about security, privacy, and safety without hampering innovation. And in the last year and a half that we've been there, we have been contributing to the wonderful economy that you see. You know, the American economy is going gangbusters. The economic GDP growth is 4.2%. Some people thought in the second quarter, some people thought that that would never occur. Unemployment is down to 3.9%, another milestone that has not been seen for about 38 years. Jobs are being created, and all of this is fueled by, of course, the tax cuts, which passed earlier this year, but also by the throttling back by all the departments on the avalanche of regulations, unnecessary, overly burdensome regulations that was coming out of the executive branch. Mm-hmm. And so we now look at regulations in a more factual-based and in a more responsible way that tries to determine what is the impact of regulations. Are they really helping? Are they hampering? And what are they trying to accomplish? And then on March 31st, as some of you may have seen, I-85 caught a bridge on I-85 in Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, caught on fire. And this is the main commuting thoroughfare connecting 7 counties in Atlanta. And we were able to work with the Georgia Department of Transportation to repair and restore that bridge within 7 weeks, below cost, and also in advance of the scheduled times. Wow. So I think that example shows that where there is a will to work to find better ways to accelerate the completion or the construction of our transportation infrastructure, that it can occur.
You had talked a little bit about technology.
Yes.
What are some of the sort of new advances in technology that the department's tracking closely?
You know, there's so many. We are on the cusp of a revolution, transformational age in transportation technology. The ones I think most people hear about are, of course, self-driving cars or driverless cars. I prefer to use self-driving cars because 73% of Americans are hesitant about getting into a car that doesn't have a driver in it. You actually increase that anxiety if you use the word driverless. So self-driving car is a bit more reassuring, but as mentioned, approximately 74% of Americans, 74% of Americans have some anxiety. But we are being petitioned now by OEMs, automobile manufacturers, by high-tech companies to redesign the way that cars look. The cars of the near future won't have, a wheelbase. It won't have a driver's side mirror. It's basically going to look like a living room. Wow. So they'll have probably 4 chairs. You've seen some of them. So our task is to ensure that we are not hampering the fast rate of innovation that's occurring in the transportation sector that's bringing many benefits to passengers, but that we do so in a way that will still address legitimate public concerns about safety, security, and of course, privacy.
Well, and one thing to think about a little bit is in the aviation space, for instance, they are computers. Planes are computers, and they fly themselves, but you still have pilots, right? And so you could apply the same to these self-driving cars, correct?
Well, you're absolutely right. Most of the self-driving cars that we see on the roads today are what's called level 2. And our rules, federal rules, regulations, still require that the driver who is sitting in that driver's seat, even if he is not interacting with the technology, that he still tap the wheelbase about every 10 minutes to ensure that there is someone there and that he's paying attention. We also require, control panels. So all of that will change when fully self-driving level 5 cars come into much greater use. But I've also said many times, I think consumer acceptance is going to be the constraint to the growth of this technology. So I'm always asked, well, how fast will it be? My stock answer, and it's not a cute answer, but it's a true answer, is it's going to be slower than some people think, and it's going to be faster than others think. But the pace is already coming. We came out with a book, a guidance book, on how to deal with these new technologies to state and local governments and other interested stakeholders, and it was called AV 2.0. We issued that in September of 2017, and in less than a year, we need to update that. So we are coming out with a multimodal version of AV policy by the Department of Transportation that's called AV 3.0, and that's going to be coming out in September. But it's indicative of the rapid pace of change. But self-driving cars is not the only technology. We're talking about supersonic. We're talking about systems that are bored underneath the ground. Some people are even talking about flying cars. That, I believe, is truly in the future. And then, of course, drones. Yeah. We're using drones now very, very frequently.
Well, I want to ask you about drones. I was sitting in my apartment one Saturday, and I live here in New York, and all of a sudden a drone popped up right outside my window.
Yeah, it's kind of disconcerting.
Yeah, it is rather disconcerting. So what's your approach to drones, especially from a regulatory perspective? How are you thinking about that?
Well, we are concerned that whatever the regulators do, that we not make things worse. Yeah. First is do no harm. And then number 2, we want there to be uniform. We would like there to be greater coordination for the benefit of the users of the drone technology to be able to fly their drones across state lines. So we want to work with the state and local officials on making sure that there's not a patchwork of conflicting regulations on drones. And then we, of course, have to address, again, the issues about privacy, which is one that you just brought up, and then also security and safety. So we operate the national airspace, and the safe integration of drones into our national airspace is a top priority. Law enforcement officials, entities, as you can imagine, are not crazy about drones flying about. So in the current FAA reform bill that is currently being discussed, it passed the House, but it has to pass the entire Congress, the law enforcement community expresses deep concerns about how to handle drones. But drones are very helpful, as we are now, we have seen just recently, they've been very helpful in surveying damages from the hurricanes of last year with Harvey, Irma, and Maria, where people cannot go. Drones are incredibly helpful in scoping out the devastation and thereby giving a leg up to early planning for restoration and rehabilitation. And here, as well as we were looking at North Carolina. Drones are being used over the Hurricane Florence situation there. And then with forest fires, where we could not send, obviously, people, the drones are very helpful there as well. So let me say one more thing about self-driving cars. There is a benefit there that I didn't neglected to mention, and that is that 94% of accidents occur because of human error. So 94% of car accidents, fatalities, injuries occur because of human error. So the prospect, so there are many other stakeholders who feel that in order to make driving safer, that perhaps the automated technology can be one path forward. And then also, if we had self-driving cars, they of course would give back freedom to the disabled and enable the elderly to have a fuller life. So there are benefits there as well.
There's a lot of positives.
But for us as regulators, we have to be concerned about safety, security, and privacy.
Let's switch to infrastructure. I was watching a White House press conference that you were giving, and you said very pointedly, there is not enough money in the world to fund every infrastructure dream that we have in the country.
I wish there were. My job would be so much easier.
Yeah. But talk a little bit, because when I think about infrastructure, I think, well, why can't they in Washington pass a bill and make LaGuardia nicer and make the highways better and the West Side Highway not so bumpy and all that stuff? But that's not actually how it works.
No, our transportation system, this is a huge point to emphasize with our foreign counterparts, because the transportation system of the United States is very decentralized. About 80% of the roads and bridges actually belong to the local and state entities. So the federal government basically manages about 20. We fund a lot. We fund more than the 20%, but most of the infrastructure actually belongs to the state and local entities. So LaGuardia, for example, Governor Cuomo has responsibility for fixing that up. And the subway in New York City is actually a New York State responsibility and authority. So the system is very decentralized. And then our country also has public-private, like transportation authorities, like airport authorities, metro transit authorities. Many of them are public-private partnerships. But you make a very good point in that even though there's not enough direct federal funding, there is a tremendous amount of resources available in the nonprofit and in the private sector that are very anxious to invest in public infrastructure. So for example, we have the most robust capital markets in the world, and we have a very strong pension system, pension funds, and also endowment funds. They are conservative investors by definition. So they like to invest long-term, 30 years, and they like to invest in collateral that does not walk away. So public infrastructure is actually very ideal for them to invest. But unfortunately, many of our states do not allow the private sector to invest in public infrastructure. There are restrictions, and they vary all across different states. But the private sector can be very helpful in coming in and financing. And we're not talking just about toll roads. We're talking about different ways of payment, of partnerships. And so it's not just toll roads. But we have to be much more creative, because the reality also is is that we cannot fund $1.5 trillion in direct federal funding. It will have a deleterious impact on our deficit, increase it dramatically, and it will squeeze out the private sector, which is not good.
Well,
so we need to have more of the private sector. And I think I'll just finish.
No, please.
And some people, I think, in Congress have a distrustful view of the private sector. So I think for those in the private sector who are engaged and believe that the private sector should be allowed to invest, I think they should also help to educate lawmakers on the benefits of public-private partnerships.
Well, so let's talk. I was down in Florida, and I went on the Bright Line from Miami to West Palm Beach, and it was amazing. Talk a little bit about how that came about.
Well, that was the ingenuity of the private sector. There was an existing line there, and it was very slow. So a group of innovative, far-sighted entrepreneurs studied the project, thought of a responsible way to increase the efficiency, the effectiveness, and improve the transportation options for people of that district. And so they put this whole project together.
And do you see that growing in other parts of the country?
I do. I think it has to, because the government doesn't have all the solutions. And we welcome responsible partners in addressing some of these very tough issues that are before us. So I think it's very exciting. Yeah. There's HighSpeed Rail projects being considered between Houston and Texas, and in many other parts of the country as well. And somebody always asks me, and I'll give you the answer without someone asking me, why can't we make Amtrak go faster? And because, again, we're a decentralized country, and also because we're not a top-down country. Yeah. So to have high-speed rail, you need to have straightaways. And Amtrak's track lines, it kind of curves. And you can't move those towns and villages and cities out of the way. I mean, that's the way to do it. You got to have a straightaway, and you have to move some cities and towns, and I don't think in this country we can do that. So that's part of why. But Amtrak is they have a new president, and he has lots of new plans, and we're very hopeful.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming back to Concordia. It was great to see you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.